The writing lesson I taught this week was actually on Pear Deck, so it was a little more interactive for my students. So this is just showing the first screen that the students would see, and I would repeat the lovely quizzes turn new drums. So that would give them the code LQTND, and they would enter that into their computer with their name. And then the lesson I taught was on personification, and personification was a word that my fourth graders are familiar with due to learning about it during their poetry unit these last couple weeks, but it was just something that we wanted to review with the students to make sure that they really were able to identify examples, especially with state testing coming up. So I first introduced this first slide and said personification, and I had the students say the word right back to me, and then I talked about how personification gives human characteristics to non-human things. So I talked about how a human characteristic would be something such as a human smiling, running, jumping, laughing. Those are all things that we as humans can do, but a non-human object cannot do. So I introduced non-human things such as a book, a table, and stuff like that obviously cannot do what us humans can do. And so then there were just a couple different examples, and I varied from either having my students echo read with me or close read the sentence with me or just having them read it. And so for this one was we echo read, the teapot on the stove screeched when it finally got hot. And so then for each of these example slides, I would have students raise their hand to tell me first what the non-human object is. And so they would tell me in this sentence, obviously, the teapot is the non-human object. And then what is the human characteristic? Another student would answer screech, because the teapot technically cannot screech, but a human could screech. And then there were just a couple more, like the tall grass danced in the breeze in the yard next door. So the non-human object would obviously be grass, and then the human characteristic would be danced. And I would ask the class, can grass dance? And they'd obviously answer no. And so that would solidify that this would be an example of personification. Okay, and then I had different slides mixed in there where it would be the example sentence, and instead of me asking as a whole group what the human characteristics would be, they would get to write their response. So the sand at the beach crawled in between my toes and up my nose. So obviously the non-human object would be sand, and then they had to type in the human characteristic on their screen. And so obviously, and then I could go here, and I could either lock their slides first, which makes it so that they cannot do anything on their slides while we're discussing what the human characteristic is. And I can always unlock that, and then I can push this button right here where it says hide student responses or project student responses. So in this case, I projected it on the screen and said, good job, you guys all picked crawled. Can a sand crawl? And they would tell me no. So that's why it's an example of personification. And then this is another one. When I opened my dryer door, it spit out a few socks onto the floor. And so again, they were typing in the human characteristic. We first said, what is the non-human object? And they said, the dryer door. And then I went over here to project their student responses. And they said spit out, spitting out socks. So obviously a dryer cannot spit. Obviously a dryer cannot spit. So that's why it's an example of personification. And then just some of the last ones we did was a thumbs up or thumbs down. If it was an example of personification, so I'd read, the frog crept silently into the valley, and I'd read it about 2 or 3 times, and then they would have the option to drag down the thumb to thumbs up if it was personification, or thumbs down, and you can see that here. And obviously most of them said thumbs up, so then we talked about why it's a thumbs up, and that would be because the non-human object is fog, and fog cannot creep, which is the human characteristic. And so there's a couple more examples that we went through. And in each of these, I was able to show the responses. Like right here, that was not an example of personification because technically a snake can slither. And so that is what I taught in writing this week.